And good morning, friends. Now, I hope everybody at home said good morning too, because everyone here in the sanctuary practice. We're going to do it one more time, though. Good morning, friends.
Morning, Todd.
That was a fun song. Random acts of kindness. And this week I found out that, would you believe it, was random acts of kindness did not come into the collective consciousness as a theme until 1982, when author Ann Herbert jotted down on a placemat, practice random kindness and senseless acts of beauty. As a response to, apparently there was a book or something about random acts of violence, and I chose not to dive down that rabbit hole and find out about that because my heart's too tender this week to dive into that. So I wanted to focus on this idea of kindness and this idea of randomness. There's a concept in the Jewish faith called mitzvah, being kind in the world. And there's a Kabbalistic teaching. The Kabbalah is the sacred order of Judaism, like Sufism is the sacred order of Islam. And there's a Kabbalistic teaching that tells us that for kindness to be effective, it must be balanced and it must be considered. For our kindness to be effective, it must be balanced and it must be considered. And every time I think about kindness, I think about the young Cub Scout, the young Boy Scout that's helping the elderly person cross the street. You've heard stories of that, or maybe you've even seen that. Perhaps you've even experienced that, either as the scout or as the person being helped. Perhaps you've just been helped, right, as an act of kindness, or perhaps you stepped into service to help someone because of your kindness. So why are we talking about randomness when we're studying order? Why would we talk about randomness when we talk about order? Because the truth is that things seem random, right? That things look chaotic. We see things that look to be in chaos when we are standing in a constricted consciousness, when we are limiting and we are seeing other, when we are seeing from our personality and not from our individuality. See, personality is of the ego. Our individuality is our divinity. We are individual expressions of the divine, of Christ's mind. And so I'm suggesting today that we practice random acts of kindness. When we do this, when we practice this randomness, that we are actually moving forward in order. Because, see, I believe that kindness is the activity of our willingness to be love. Can you feel that? Can you feel the truth in that? Y'all say yes if you can. Okay. See, our kindness is the activity of our willingness to be loved. See, do you see that? We've got two other powers that are intersecting with our experience of order. See, our Boy Scout, our Cub Scout is willing to be loved and take action. Our elder is willing to be loved and take action, to be helped. See, being both the Boy Scout and being the elder are both acts of service, right? Because there is no other, right? We are always stepping forward in service, and service is our spiritual path. So the Sufi poet, I just reminded you that Sufism is the mystical order of Islam. There's a Sufi poet, Rumi, one of my favorites. And Rumi said this: since in order to speak, one must first listen. Learn to speak by listening. Since in order to speak, one must first listen. Learn to speak by listening. Right? So there's a joke about that Boy Scout that's crossing the road, right? Because the Boy Scout approaches someone and says, "Can I help you across the road?" And so he helps a person across the road, and then he sees another person and he's like, "Let me help you across the road." And so he helps him across the street, and that happens, and that becomes pattern. That becomes just a pattern of action, and not an act of kindness, but just something that he does. And so he approaches someone and takes them by the arm and begins to drag them across the street. Well, you know what? They didn't want to cross the street. See, to practice a random act of kindness and move forward with order, we must be willing to listen. Right? We must have a willingness to listen, not only to the other individuals' expressions of the Christ that we encounter, but we also must listen to that Christ within us, that still soft voice that Emmy just told us about when she read the daily word. We must listen to God, good love. And the reason we must listen to God, good love, is because, as we learned last week, the use of order is us putting God, good love, first in our lives. We make God, good love, our primary concern. And see, we do that because here's a nugget of truth. And we read it every Sunday, that first principle of unity. That first principle of unity, God, absolute good and unconditional love, is the one constant presence and power. Right? We say that, but here's the truth. That one presence, that one power is showing up right now as me. That one constant presence, that one constant power is showing up right now as you. As you. As each one of us. That is our individuality. And so we get to show up time and again. And when we live from this truth, when we live from this truth and we put God, good love, first in our lives, because that's who we are. That is the truth of who we are. We provide the events for other individuals' expressions of the divine to experience ordering. You get that? See, when we live from this truth and we practice random acts of kindness, other people can have an experience where they get to put God first. They get to live from the truth of their consciousness. And we know life is consciousness, right? Do we feel this? Somebody out here wants an example, I bet. Anybody want an example? Somebody might even yell out, "Give me an example, Todd." Thank you, Steve. I knew someone would ask. So there was a time when you all know this, I was agnostic and maybe atheist for a good chunk of my time and of my life. And I was living in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was reading a book with some friends, The Celestine Prophecy. Anybody remember that book? Synchronicities, and it was really cool. And so my one of my closest and dearest friends, even to this day, Shelley, her mother gifted me a book. And I read only like the first couple of chapters of that book, because I don't know if you know this, but when you get a book and you you read what you're ready to read. Have you had that experience? You get the information that you need, and then you might put it aside for a period of time. And so I got through the second chapter of this book, and then I put it aside. And that book was Discover the Power Within You by Eric Butterworth. And so, I read this, and I read his experience of Jesus and who Jesus was. And Jesus was not a magician making miracles. Jesus had an evolved consciousness. He understood who he was, and he became the pattern of the perfect Adam man achieving an enlightened consciousness. And he told us that everything he did, we could do too. And that struck me as truth. And that allowed me to have suddenly a relationship with Jesus. And then I put that book down. Now, it's interesting that many years later and 2 homes later, and I am living in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I walk into a church, even though I had declined numerous invitations to come to this church. We flashed the mission statement up on the screen from an overhead projector. You remember overhead projectors? We seek to live and practice the truth principles taught by Jesus and all great spiritual masters. And I was like, what? That's different. And so when I got home, I pulled that book off of my bookcase. Okay, I received the book in the early 90s. And I was looking at this 15 years ago. So it was a long time. I held on to that book for a long time. And I looked at the back cover to see who wrote it, and the writer was Eric Butterworth. And would you believe that Eric Butterworth was a Unity minister? And I had been in a Unity church, and I had circuitously found my way to the place where I belonged. I was ordering because someone else chose a random act of kindness. And we see how that order has showed up, because now I'm standing in a Unity church delivering a message, working in a field ministry program so that I can be ordained by Unity. This is exciting to me when I see order at work in my life. And when you're willing to look at the randomness in your life through a new lens, you can see order. I promise. For our kindness to be effective, it must be balanced and considered. Right? Balanced and considered. That balanced and considered is the very thing that Emmy told us about this morning. It is guidance. I open my heart and mind, and I shifted I've rewritten that affirmation this morning. I open my mind and heart, and I receive my guidance. Not to receive. I'm not putting it out there in the future. I open my heart and mind, and I receive my guidance now. Right? Because when we receive our guidance and we live from that guidance, we are putting God, good love first in our lives. Right? I've got a couple of more, I think, incredible stories of randomness that move me, and I think they'll move you too. In probably the 40s, I'm thinking, a 12-year-old girl is running down the street in New York City. Her parents have just gotten divorced, and she's struggling a little bit, and she runs a lot. She runs from her problems. Has anybody else ever run from your problems? Run? Yeah, we run. Sometimes we run from our problems. Kath is shaking her head no, she doesn't do that. She's enlightened. Sometimes we run from our problems. So this young girl is running from her problems, and she actually plows into this elderly man knocks him down. Right? So the kindness in her, she helps him up. She helps this man up. And with a French accent, he said, "Are you planning to run like that for the rest of your life?" And she said, "Yes, sir, looks that way." You ever felt that way? I'm just going to keep running. And he said, "Well, bon voyage." And she said, "Bon voyage." And she took off running because she's on her way to school. So the following week, she's walking her dog. And she sees this man. And he said, "Oh, you are the runner. Where are you going?" "To Central Park to think about things." And he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to go with you sometime." Okay. You can go with me. And so here's that they become friends and they companion one another to Central Park over several times a week for a long time, more than a year. And one day he stopped and he turned to her and he said, "Jean, what to you is the most fascinating question?" And she said, "It's about history, Mr. Taylor," because he told her to call him Mr. Taylor. So she said, "It's about history, Mr. Taylor, and destiny too. How can we take the right path in history so that we even have a destiny? My friends at school all talk about the H-bomb, and I wonder if I'll ever get to be 21 years old. Mr. Taylor, you always talk about how the future of man as if we had a future. I want to know what we have to do to keep that future coming." And he said, "We have to have more specialists in spirit who will lead people into self-discovery." This is from an essay that she wrote. She puts, he said, and this is exactly what he said, "I was taking notes because I knew I was in the presence of greatness. We are being called into metamorphosis, into a far higher order. And yet we often act only from a tiny portion of ourselves. It is necessary that we increase that portion, but do not think for 1 minute that we are alone in making that possible. We are part of a cosmic evolutionary movement that inspires us to unite with God. This is the lightning flash for all our potentialities. This is the great originating cause of all our shifts and changes." I love that. All our shifts and changes. We are part of a cosmic evolutionary movement that inspires us to unite with God. But see, we don't have to unite with God. We have to unite our consciousness with the truth of who we are, because we are already in truth united with God. Now, one day, Mr. Taylor said, "Au revoir, Jean." It was the Thursday before Easter. And so she said, "Au revoir, I'll see you Tuesday." And Tuesday came, and he didn't show up. And she kept going, and he never showed up, because she found out that he had died that Sunday, that Sunday, which was Easter Sunday. And so years later, someone gifted her this book, a book called The Phenomenon of Man. It was a hardbound book, and they had removed the dust jacket from the book. And so she starts reading it, and she goes, "Oh my God, this is my friend. This sounds like everything my friend used to say to me." So she goes back and she says, "Hey, I need to see the cover of that book." And so they show her the cover, and she turns to the jacket where there is a photograph. And indeed, it was the elderly man that she had run into running in the street and knocked down, who became her friend so many years ago. That man was Teilhard de Chardin. He is a Jesuit priest. He was French, a scientist, a paleontologist, a theologian, a philosopher, a teacher. And he is often credited for something that you hear me say a lot. He is credited with saying, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So here, this random act of a young girl running into a man and knocking him down, and her having the kindness to help him stand back up. And a friendship that bonded because he was willing to be helped up, and she was willing to allow him to accompany her to a park, planted seeds in her mind. And I'm talking about Gene Houston, who has become one of the most amazing philosophers and theologians of our time. Everything is connected. Everything, when we put God first, good first, love first, orders our lives. Orders our lives so that you can be who you're meant to be, so you can embody the Christ of who you are being called to be in this world. Over and over again, this is the truth. So one last story, and this story is why we have a train. This story is why we have a train this morning. Around 1911, nobody here remembers that far back anymore, do they? 1911, a 12-year-old boy was waiting for the train in Daytona, Florida. He was from a very poor family. He was a black young man. And his family had scraped together all of the money that they had. Scraped together all of the money that they had so that he could go to school, because there were no high schools for black children where he was. And when he got there and he bought his ticket, the conductor told him, that case that you have there, his steamer trunk, was so old and battered and beat up. He said, that's not going to make it. You can't carry that on with you. You're going to have to ship that separately. And so this young man sat down on the steps at the train station and began to cry. And so in my telling of this story, I know that this old farmer, an old black man, sees this young black child crying, and he walks up to him and he says, "Why are you crying, boy?" And this boy explains to him, "I have spent all the money I have to buy this ticket to go to school, and I don't have enough to now ship my steamer trunk. And if I can't take my steamer trunk, I can't go to school." So this man, from some act of kindness that was led from the Spirit within, gave this child enough money to send his steamer trunk so he could go to school. So he could go to school. So here's that person was Howard Thurman. Do you know who Howard Thurman is? Howard Thurman wrote a book in 1949 called Jesus and the Disinherited. And in it, he provided an interpretation of the New Testament Gospels that laid the foundation for a nonviolent, silent civil rights movement. A nonviolent civil rights movement. Thurman presented the basic goals of Jesus' life as helping the disinherited of the world change from within so they would be empowered to survive in the face of oppression. A love rooted in the deep river of faith wrote Thurman, would help oppressed peoples overcome persecution. It may twist and turn, fall back on itself and start again, stumble over an infinite series of hindering rocks, but at the last, the river must answer the call to the sea. So Howard Thurman, he wrote that book, and it's said that Martin Luther King Jr. never went anywhere without taking his copy of Jesus and the Disinherited. Reverend Thurman became a dean of the theology school at Boston University, and he became a mentor to MLK Jr. And that only happened because someone in 1911 in Daytona, Florida, made a random act of kindness and gave a child enough money to ship his belongings to school. The river must answer the call to the sea. The individual expression of your Christ being is calling out for you to know your own divinity, to know your connection to one mind, to God mind, to divine mind. Your individual expression is calling out for you to be the presence of love. Can you feel that? That is the call. That is the call of this still small voice that lives within us. And when we open to that still small voice, when we open to that guidance, when we receive that guidance, and when we use our order by making God, good, love first in our lives, we are uniting in a way that is miraculous. When we unite in that way, we get to make miracles. So as you go forth this week, I want to invite you to consider what random acts of kindness and senseless acts of beauty you can bring into the world from this place of order. What is God calling you to do now? Right? And I did some research and I looked this up. And if I have to tell you to be nice to the waiters where you shop and be nice to the checkout clerks, we're not going deep enough. You get to make a difference in this world by showing up as the Christ of your being. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. So now let's take a deep breath together. And let's bring our awareness to our heart center and invite Dedri to center us for a brief meditation.
Expressing as love in you and I, love expressing as God in you and I. Spirit expresses through the heart of a stranger, good unfolding through the heart of a child. It's love in action, in every gesture, word or deed. It's love expressing as God in you and I. Love expressing as God, God expressing as love. It's love in action, in every gesture, word
So we bring our awareness into this present moment. And with a deep breath, we relax into our seats. We unclench our jaw, we relax our shoulders, and we bring our presence, the fullness of our consciousness into this moment, into this sacred moment. And from this stillness, reflect on these words. From the stillness. Love alone is capable of uniting living beings in such a way as to complete and fulfill them. For it alone takes them and joins them by what is deepest in themselves. All we need to imagine our ability to love developing until it embraces the totality of men and the earth. Love alone is capable of uniting living beings. Love alone is who we are in this moment, in the silence. Love alone is who I am. Love is who I am. Placing love first, I order my life, and my life is ordered. Love is who I am. And so it is.
Spirit expresses through the heart of a stranger, good unfolding through the heart of a child. It's love in action, in every gesture, word or deed. It's love expressing this God in you and I. Love expressing as God, God expressing as love. It's love in action in